Today, as we get started in our Bible study, we're up to 1 Samuel 22. 1 Samuel 22. So, kind of as we've gone forward, we had last week David, and now you have the full division that has taken place between Saul and King David. So now they are opposite of one another. And now we see some of the fallout that has happened as a result of that. Fallout for David, really, as people start to come and follow just him. Fallout also from those that were there to help David as well. And we see very much where Saul ends up very much opposed to the Lord, opposed to those who are serving the Lord too. And so his thoughts are entirely secular as we get into things taking place. So his thoughts are entirely about rebellion, putting down rebellion, about his thoughts are really not with the Lord, but about how he can keep and maintain power for, and really it's multiple, for himself and for his children, his sons, to go after him. So how can I keep power and keep my name great as we keep this kingdom going forward, all coming under my name forever and ever? So that's kind of where Saul's at. So we come here to 1 Samuel 22. But any thoughts before we begin? All right, let's read the first two verses. And I think we went clockwise last week. So let's go, we went counterclockwise last week. So let's go clockwise this week. Just the first two verses.
David departed from there and escaped to the cave at Bull. And when his brothers and all others' house heard it, they went down there to him. And everyone who was in distress, and everyone who was in debt, and everyone who was bitter in soul gathered to him, and he became commander over them. And there were with him about 400 men.
So now he leaves, he departs. He's got the sword of Goliath. He's got the food that he had from the priests of Nob. And he's gone forward from there. And so he departs and escapes to the cave of Adullam. Basically, it's about 12 miles east of Gath. So kind of think down in the Gaza Strip today, and you go about 12 miles east of there. And so kind of it's out there in that wilderness area that's down in the south area. And in that area, you've got caves galore. So you've got many, many different caves, which will be interesting later on when we run into David running from Saul, that Saul's trying to find him. And basically, you have to go and look into almost every cave as you're down there in order to try to find where it might be. So it is an onerous task. It'd be a whole lot easier if you had a drone. You just fly this drone up above, see where they've got these people. Okay, now we can follow them. The problem in this area is that you've got all these hills with the caves all through them. So you got the hills, and then they all come down between them, which is kind of the result of the area, because it's a very dry area. But whenever you've got rain, you've got the torrents that run down. And when you've got hard rain, how much does the ground soak it up? It kind of doesn't, right? So you end up with nothing for a while, and then large amounts of rain all at once through certain areas. And that's where every rain then digs it further and further and further on down. Not because of a creek going down, but because it's the word there's wadi. If you go down to Arizona, they call it a dry. Basically, where all this flushes into one area, spits through, and carries everything out. And so that's why you've got in that area the hills that kind of come all the way down, because all that water goes down and keeps digging it further and further. And because of the rock there, it has a tendency to build caves. So with the water and the caves and the runoff, it all kind of builds itself. So that's just kind of the topography where David went, which is quite frankly, if you're going to find a place to hide, is a good place to hide. Down there in the midst of all that. However, very quickly, it goes from David being one to a lot of other people, doesn't it? And you get to that statement there about 400 men. And that would be 400. They'd be counting the fighting men. So they would not be counting, the kiddos. You got a 6-year-old, that's not a fighting, somebody that's going to be able to pick up a sword and fight. And it would not be talking about the older men either who could not fight either. So this would be the 400 men, thinking militarily. So you had 400 fighting men. Now, if you've got 400 fighting men, you got more than 400 people there. So you could easily think 400 men, 1,000-ish people that would be gathered around. If you're also then thinking the women, you're thinking the children, you're thinking the some of the older people that would not be able to fight. And so that's a significant group that all of a sudden David has around him. So now you've got 1,000 people-ish that are there following David down there in the country. However, you can still hide 1,000 people because of the topography. You can't just go up on a hill, look straight out, and see where things are at. You're looking out, and all the tops of the hills are all fairly close. And then you'd have 1,000 people that'd be down in one of those valleys. It would still be a good hiding place, even for 1,000 people, as long as they didn't, make fires. You could follow a trickle of smoke going up pretty easily. And so that's kind of where they're at. Now, that's a significant number there, 400 fighting men that are suddenly with King David. Now, where did they come from? Well, his brothers and his father's house heard it. So you got those. Remember, the last we heard of David's household, of his brothers, they were not that pleased with him. Because remember, they had been the ones passed over by Samuel. And now David, the youngest that's out there watching the sheep, he's the one that gets anointed as king. But things change, don't they? And so now you have his brothers coming to serve him to a certain degree, definitely to support him in what's going on. But they're also kind of coming to him out of fear, aren't they? You've got Saul, and is Saul pleased with David? Not at all, right? Now, what do you think Saul is going to think of David's household? Yep, he's not going to be trusting them either. And we're going to see for good reason. For good reason that they run to David. Partly out of fear of Saul. Partly we're going to go to them as well. Now, you got a lot of similarities here when you get to the story of Joseph, don't you? Because Joseph had a dream, and in his dream, you've got the sheaves of, or the stars, he's got 2 dreams, that are then bowing down to him. And you remember the interpretation of that dream that Joseph had? The brothers picked up on it fast. Yep, that his brothers would be bowing to Joseph. That's not what they wanted to hear, right? Joseph was already the favorite, and now he's having dreams saying, you are all going to bow down to me. That's what part of the reason why Joseph's brothers then sold him into slavery. Get rid of this kiddo, and now we'll get our stuff back. Eventually, the dreams come true, and they come and serve him. Same thing here when you got the anointing of David. David is anointed. Brothers are not pleased. Now you're right a little bit later, and now they are serving the future king. So you have the households, and when you get, like I said, when you have the household, it says here, and all his father's house heard it, and they went down there to him. And you get the father's house, not just the men. You got everybody gathering together. Now, it takes a lot more to take care of 1,000, especially you got some of the older folk and you've got the kids there in order to take care of everything, right? And so we're going to see what David does in a moment there. But that's what's going to happen is part of just a good military understanding of David protecting the people that are around him. And yet, what are we going to see with Saul? The exact reverse. So we're going to find here again how Saul acts as opposed to how King David acts. And we see how David has the heart of the Lord. Not that he doesn't mess up majorly at times, but he's got the Lord's heart. Saul absolutely does not as it goes forward. So you've got all of his household come. And verse 2 is interesting. And everyone who was in distress, in debt, bitter in soul, came out to follow David too. So you got David's household. And what do you think of the rest of this people that have gathered around him? Probably not what you would consider to say the top of the line, right? This is not the generals that are saying, I'm going to come out there and follow him. In fact, I think a lot of this group, on the Statue of Liberty, what does it say to welcome? I think it's the Statue of Liberty. It's your poor, your what? The weary, the
Just saw that this week.
oh, well, you should know then.
I know we should.
But without thinking the exact words, I could probably find it online. Anybody online, you can find it easily. Just Google it. But if I'm remembering, it's not send me your wealthy, send me your powerful, send me the best intelligentsia that you've got, right? Huddled masses. That's part of it, right? So it's kind of like send your people over and so it's kind of a little bit kind of like this group, isn't it? The statue, send me your huddled masses. Here, send me those that are in debt, who are in distress, who are bitter in soul. Now, that's just kind of what happened. Oh, you got it. What does it say?
Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to break free. The wretched refuge of your teeming shore.
So you're poor, you're huddled masses.
Yearning to break free.
So it's you're poor, you're huddled masses, but the caveat is yearning to be free. That's kind of a bit of these people, isn't it? That are gathering there. Those that are in debt, basically, what are they? Pretty much slaves. Yep. So those in debt, not only are that would be even worse than the poor. Those that are in debt are in indentured servitude. It would be a polite way to put it. What's that song? The song kind of goes back to the 1930s. I owe my soul to the company store, right? or I think it's company Stowe. It is Stowe. I mean, it's yep,
They get in debt to the company because the only place they can buy anything is at the company-owned store.
yep.
They can never make enough to get out.
You exactly. So how could you get out? Go to California. Right? That's kind of what a number of people with the Dust Bowl era and all of that kind of did. You owe us, and you are never going to be out of debt. What was the thought here? You are in debt. You are never going to get out of that debt. And so that was some of the same aspect. Now, on a slightly different tangent there with those that are in debt, they would never have gotten out of debt. But what had God put forward that the people of Israel should have been doing? Every 40 years, you have a year of Jubilee. And the year of Jubilee, you are freed and your land is freed. It's kind of a fascinating thing that not only are you freed of your debt, but your land is freed as well. So that's how the Lord had put it forward. So that there would never be this, you are in debt and your children are in debt and you are indebted forever and ever. That was not what God had intended. Now, are there times where, okay, I will work for you in order to get through this time? Yeah. But there was to be that year of Jubilee where they are freed. Guess what was not happening under Saul? That was not at all happening. And so that was not, and so they saw this is not happening. So therefore, we are in debt. Our children are going to be in debt, and we will never get out. So, okay, so what do we do in order to get out of this? Let's go to David. So that's a bit of what, and is he welcoming them? Absolutely, he does. Absolutely. Now, who would David kind of prefer? Would kind of come and for him? The army. Yeah, come to me, your strong-armed, shield and sword-laden people. No. But once again, who is the Lord is going to do what? He's going to take them, and who's going to save them? The Lord. And so part of why is this all? It is part of the Lord's plan. David, you're not getting out of this because of yourself. Your only way of getting out is because I'm taking care of you. I'm watching over you, David. And to a certain extent, and don't forget David. But he is bringing that forward. So that's a bit of the, and so of the 400 men, there were some military men that were part of it. David's household. Remember when David went to fight Goliath? He was getting there to help his brothers who were in Saul's military, right? So there were some that had military experience. That would be an example. But did all 400? It would be a different word. So he had 400 men that were a mix of everything. Any other thoughts in those first couple of verses? All righty, let's read the rest of this piece here, verse 3 through 5.
And David went from there to Mizpah of Moab, and he said to the king of Moab, please let my father and mother stay with you till I know what God will do for me. And he left them with the king of Moab, and they stayed with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Then the prophet Gad said to David, do not remain in the stronghold. Depart and go into the land of Judah. So David departed and went into the forest of Haran.
And so he goes off to Moab. And Moab would be east of the Dead Sea. So he's over here west of the Dead Sea. Think about halfway-ish between the Dead Sea and here you have the Salt Sea. Is that the right wording that it used here? Or is it sea of salt? That doesn't say it in this one. That's right. Um, but anyway, the Salt Sea. So the Dead Sea. So he goes from about halfway between those two and probably goes south of the Dead Sea in order to get over to Moab on the east to the east of the Dead Sea. So he's thinking, where can I go in order to keep all these people safe? He goes to Moab. Remember, he first went to the Philistines. They were not pleased at that time to see him, were they? That's where he had to act insane just to get out of there. And quite frankly, he did a good job of being insane. Okay. You never know what you're able to do until you have to do it sometimes. And so, so probably would not be best going to take this 1,000 people and we're going to go up right by King Saul. Probably went down south in order to get over there, which in essence is going into the wilderness. And so you can kind of think they go down into the wilderness in order to go up to Moab over there. And he asked the king of Moab for sanctuary, basically to take care of all the people that are there, that he's got this 1,000 people. And it would have been easy just to stay there, wouldn't it? Now, why would the king of Moab been okay with this? Well, we've got 400 more people to help fight. And if there is a war coming, guess which 400 will probably be at the very front of that battle? Probably these 400. So you would have some shock troops right there should you have to go to war. That's always nice. That's always nice to have in a military thought process. And so here he goes, brings his parents there. His parents live with him in the stronghold. They're safe. And why does God have to send a prophet to say, go back home? David probably wants to stay there, right? We're safe, everybody. Nice. This is safe. We don't have to worry about Saul throwing spears at my head. That's a good thing. And so and the king of Moab is allowing us to stay here. We can keep doing that. But instead, he's told to go back. And so the prophet Gad, now Gad will come up later on when we get to 2 Samuel. He will be in David's court. So this Gad, who's a prophet, later on when David rises to prominence and is king, is brought into court, is brought into David's court, is the word to put. So he becomes one of the advisors that's gathered together. And when a prophet tells you the truth, okay, that sounds like a good person to have around you. So that's what eventually will happen with Gad. And you can also think those people that are with you when times are tough, those are people that can be trusted more, right? So here Gad the prophet comes to David. Obviously, word had come around where David was at. He comes over to David. And so, David, I'll give you the word of the Lord right now. And if you're willing to give the word of the Lord to David when he's off in Moab, guess what? When he's part of your court, he would also be somebody that would give you that same word as well. Now, you can kind of go through there. And so he asked, please let my mother and father stay with you. Now, is it more than that? Yeah. That means at a minimum, David's household. Probably not his brothers who would kind of go and fight with him. But take care of mom, take care of dad, take care of the household. And with those others that came along, he probably would say, and please let them stay too. I've declared they're all part of this household. So you've got a good group that's going to be staying in Moab. Eventually, most of them will come back. That eventually will happen. However, not at the moment. So as King David goes and fights, he takes his military men and some others that are needed. But in the midst of all of this, uh, the women are a lot of the women, the children, some of the older people, mom, dad, his household, all away in a safe place. That gives David a little bit more of a free hand, doesn't it? And so that's all of what's happening, taking place there. And then Gad gives that direction. Go back to the land of Judah. Very simple. So David obeyed the word of the Lord. Now you can see the whole difference taking place here, right? When the word of the Lord was brought to Saul, and Saul do this by Samuel, what did Saul do? What he wanted to do. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go make this happen. Yeah, Lord, I don't like what you're telling me. I'm going to go do it myself. Here, what did David probably want to do? Stay in a good, safe place. But the Lord said, go. So what does he do? He went. He followed the word of the Lord. So you see the massive differences taking place in the hearts of these two men. And so he goes, but he doesn't, he's not stupid either. So he goes back into the dangerous place, goes back to Judah, but he goes back into the forest area, the forest of Hereth. And so he does not go back into, out on the plains and say, hi, Saul, this is where we're at. He finds a place to hide, and he goes into the forests. And the forests are a good place to hide. Just thinking, in English lore, one of the you got Robin Hood and his merry men, right? Where do they hide? In the forest. Yep, they don't go hide out there on the plain. They go hide in the forest. And so, kind of the same thing. We're gonna go hide in the forest. There, you can keep pretty well hidden in the forest. So that's what's going on with David. Any last thoughts on that first section right there?
Was the stronghold, when he was with Moab, they mentioned, do not remain in stronghold. Depart.
And go back to Judah.
Yeah, so the stronghold was Moab.
Probably the capital.
Yeah.
So probably the capital or right around it. Because usually the way they did fortresses and stuff of that nature. And when I did my archaeological dig in Syria, this was the case for that city, and it was a normal case for how they did it. You've got a hill, and you build the city on the hill. And you don't have these massive hills usually. There's other examples, Petra. That'd be a whole different thought process. But the most common is you got a good-sized hill, and so you build your city on that hill. And then you build a wall around the city. The one that we were actually at was kind of a double-humped hill. You had a hump here and a higher hump up here. And then you build this wall all around the city. You build your gate structure here, and then you build the palace and the temple and stuff, usually at the very highest point, the apex of the hill, so that you can be up there, and then you can kind of see what's going around. That's why in archaeological work, the number one and number two places you do archaeological work when you're digging it, that's called a tell. When you're digging in a tell, first you want to get the gatehouse structure. There's usually some good stuff right there because you've got a lot of things that have been happening. And then you go at the very top of the hill too, because that's where you're most likely to find writing that's up there. Because that's where you've got the palaces, that's where you've got the temples, that's where people are most likely to have fun writing. And so you've got this wall, and then you've got this city, but most of the people don't live in the wall. Because the bigger the hill, the more you have to build this massive wall. It's a lot to build a wall. Especially when you can't just go forward and have people trucking in the concrete. It's a lot to build a wall. And so most of the people would be outside the wall. And so we did the digging on the wall, but you would also do little digs outside down on this. So you have the hill and then it goes out like this. You do some digging out here too, because that's where most of the people would have lived. But you're not going to find the really cool stuff there usually. The cool stuff is where the rich people live. Up there at the temple, up there at the palace, up at those areas. And so most of the people would have lived on the area around. And then if an enemy comes, then everybody floods into the city. So that's kind of how all of that happened and took place. And so with the stronghold here, that's what it probably was. You probably had the hill, you had the walls that were around it, and everything, all the good stuff right on in there. And most people would have lived outside the stronghold. And then if the enemy comes, everybody floods on in, and then they leave, you go back home. And so that's kind of how so that would have been, so they probably would have been on that area, not inside the city, but the king probably went forward and said, well, you got this 1,000 people. We've got that area over there. That's outside the walls. You go build some houses over there. And they probably did. So that's probably what was going on. So does that kind of answer kind of what the stronghold was at?
I should have known.
Oh. So now we go back to Saul. So we've looked at King David. This has happened. And when Saul hears that there's 1,000 people, 400 strong military men following David, Saul's immediate thoughts, and quite frankly, is that, he's building up an army. We're talking treason. Everybody that's there with David or has supported David has committed treason. In fact, we've even got that. Is it the? I think it is in the Constitution. I could be wrong on that, but how to deal with traitors and where they will fall under. Even I think it's the 14th Amendment to the bill to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights was basically put there in order to stop people who fought in the Confederacy from having from being able to have elected office. So I think it's the 14th Amendment. I could be wrong in the number, but I think it's the 14th Amendment was primarily put there in order to say those that fought for the Confederacy cannot hold elected office. And that was if it's the one I'm thinking of, primary reason for that. How we deal with traitors. They did not go forward and say we're going to slaughter them all. But they said, but neither are we going to let you be in power anymore. So that's what happened right after the Civil War in the United States. Now we get to Saul, and instead of that, he's going to anybody that has supported David, we're going to wipe them off. That's where Saul is at. So you can kind of see again where the two are at. So let's read verse 6 through 8.
Now Saul heard that David was discovered and the men who were with him. Saul was sitting at Gibeah under the tamarisk tree on the height with his spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing about him. And Saul said to his servants who stood about him, "Hear now, people of Benjamin, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards? Will he make you all commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds, that all of you have conspired against me? No one discloses to me when my son makes a covenant with the son of Jesse. None of you is sorry for me or discloses to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me, to lie in wait, as at this day."
So you can see the thought processes of Saul there, can't you? But first, Saul was sitting at Gibeah. That was both Saul's birthplace and it was their capital. So underneath King Saul. So that's where he had his capital. And he's up on the hill under the tamarisk tree. Just kind of interesting side note on just how this takes place in the writing. When you get to when 1 Samuel and 2 Samuel were written, he was sitting under the tamarisk tree. Everybody knew where that tree was. Everybody knew that tree, and trees can be get really old. So the tamarisk tree, you all know where that's at. Today, we have no clue exactly which hill that might be because we don't know the tamarisk tree. But when I was in, it's just interesting how that gets to be and just the mindset. Everybody knows this. When I was down, Alex and I went down to Texas and did some visiting, and you get underneath, go to Texas A&M was one of the places that we visited, and there's I forget what they called it. I should know that, but anyway, they've got a really old tree that's down there. I think it's a cedar. I could be wrong, but a really old tree. And when you get to those kind of trees, they're not, this nice big tree that goes straight up into the heavens that you can make a mast for the for ships. You get down to that part of Texas, they grow up and then they go all over and just it's like all the way over. And so they're not these tall trees they might think of with the tall pines or something like that. They grow up and then every direction, and it goes this way, that. Oh, I'm going this way now. But they've got one tree there that's very old, and they have a name for it. And I can't think of the name of it. But it is an old tree, and it's evidently, I remember the story, evidently you go under it, and that's where if two people go under that tree, they will be together forever. So when Valentine's Day comes along, they actually have to have a sign-in sheet, because so many people want to go under that tree, and so on Valentine's Day we'll go under the tree, and then our lives will be entwined forever. And I think they told me that the last Valentine's Day there were even 3 proposals under that tree, but they had to wait their turn in order to go under that tree. And that, like I said, there was a name for that tree, and it's a big tree, not one that goes up to it probably goes up maybe 20 feet high, something like that. But it spreads out about, it covers a large area that's there. So it is an old tree. But all I'm meaning is you go to Texas A&M and like I said, I can't remember the name, but they'll say the name of that tree. And guess what? Everybody knows that tree. That tree over there, I know right where it's at. Same thing here, under the tamarisk tree. You say that, everybody that's reading this knows the tamarisk tree. Well, not us 3,000 years later. But everybody would know. And that is really a sign here in the writing for the authenticity of the scriptures that are here. Because if you were to write something like this 1,000 years later, that's not how you would write these things. The tamarisk tree. Nobody knows where nobody knows that. So you would have a lot of other ways that you would talk about it. He was on the highest hill, overlooking everything, and something like that, right? The fact that you have this vernacular talking that just finds its way all the way in there really gives the authenticity to the age of this. So this was under Saul. Everybody knows the tree still. And so that's how they wrote. You would have been at Texas A&M. Everybody knows that tree. You had just written the name. There you go. Everybody knows that tree. So kind of that same thought process. So it's fascinating going through things like this, and with the way that you talk and the way that you bring things up kind of shows the authenticity. Yes, this was written pretty close to the time of all these things having, 100 years? Okay, maybe. Still a good length of time. but trees can last a lot longer than 100 years. That one in A&M was there when they started the school. I think it was a little bit before the Civil War is when Texas A&M started. So it goes back a long time. And there are still pictures of that tree way back when. So they can last a long time in memory. So that's where they're at. And then Saul goes forward up at the top with his spear. And you can just kind of think, here I am. And he's throwing a good old pity party, isn't he? I love or what is the exact words that were used in there? And none of you is sorry for me. Why aren't you sorry for me? That's about as deep a pity party as you can get into, isn't it? And then, but to a certain degree, none of you servants was letting me know how close David and Jonathan were. But what's the biggest problem? Saul knew too. Saul was aware that they were close. And just remembering from the last couple of chapters, from Saul's own mouth, he says, and I knew that they were close to one another. And so when he's now saying, none of you told me this. Well, we knew that you knew King Saul, but nobody's going to say that to Saul, are they? So he's up there throwing the most massive pity party that he can imagine. And then when he's in the throes of that, that's where we come to verse 9 and 10. And I think it's my turn, right? Then answered Doeg the Edomite, who stood by the servants of Saul. Remember, he was there when at the last chapter. I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob to Elimelech, the son of Ahitub. And he inquired of the Lord for him and gave him provisions and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. So this was the guy last chapter who was there and saw that Ahimelech, and how he had given the bread and these things to David. So he lets King Saul know all of these things. And quite frankly, are they true? Yeah, they're true. But you notice the three things that are there. Well, he gave the sword of Goliath. He gave provisions. But the first thing, inquired of him of the Lord. So did David go there for food? Yeah. Did he want an iron sword? Yep. But really, what was the biggest of the big? Talking to the Lord. So he went to talk to the Lord and see what the Lord's discernment was. Now that should be a good thing, shouldn't it? That should be a wonderful, we should go and inquire of the Lord and obey the Lord. Saul's not going to be pleased though, is he? You told him what the Lord wanted of him. How is Saul kind of viewing the Lord in this stage? The Lord is my enemy, right? The Lord is my enemy. And so I need to stop David from knowing what the Lord wants for him, because that would be bad for me. That's a horrible way to think. That's also very, Saul should know better, knowing his own words that are coming up. So we get to the next part, verse 11 and 12.
Then the king sent the son of Amalek, the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house. The priests who were at Nob, and all of them came to the king. And Saul said, Hear now, son of Ahitub. And he answered, Here I am, Lord.
And very scared, I am certain. Very frightened. Because you remember last chapter when David came to him, he was shaking, right? Why are you here? And why was he afraid? He was afraid of what Saul would do. Unfortunately, he was very right. He was very right. So he brings the priests who were at Nob. Nob, that's where the tabernacle was. So you had Saul, his area, and then you had the tabernacle and that area. So Saul very much had the priests and the political power very separate from one another. You could think the kingdom of power and the kingdom of grace. Kingdom of grace would have been where the priests were at. And he's not pleased with the priests at all, is he? The priests gave support to David. And did he kind of do that? Yeah. He gave him food, right? He gave him word of the Lord. He gave him Goliath's sword. That would be giving, what are the words? Aid. I'll just say aid to the enemy. And if that happened today, that would also be a big issue, wouldn't it? Giving aid to the enemy, however that might be defined. And so Saul is ticked off. So he's very curt. Hear now, son of Ahitub. And you notice he's not even using his first name, is he? He just says, the son of this person. And that's what he did earlier in this chapter to David too. So the son of Jesse. Doesn't even acknowledge that person's name. That's kind of where, not even going to say their name because they're that worthless. Of course, it's the exact opposite. So he has all the priests of that family gathered together. And he says, here I am, my Lord. This is bad. And it is. So then we get verse 13. Your turn.
And Saul said, hear now, son of
13.
And Saul said to him, why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse? And in that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of God before him, so that he has risen against me to lie in wait as at this day.
So they're down there. They've got these people. They're off maybe in Moab, but they might come back. We know that they did. But Saul is fearful of a rebellion against him. And so, why have you given aid to the enemy? Why have you done it? And so then we go to the next verses, verse 14 and 15.
Then Elimelech answered the king, and who among all your servants is so faithful as David? Who is the king's son-in-law and captain over your bodyguard and honored in your house? Is today the first time that I have inquired of God for him? No. Let not the king impute anything to his servant or to all the house of my father, for your servant has known nothing of all this, much or little.
So he's saying, I didn't know. In fact, isn't this David that you're saying that I gave aid to? He's the one, and here's kind of putting it back onto Saul, isn't he? Rightfully so. That's not what Saul wants to hear. In fact, that's not what any king or ruler really wants to hear. He says, here's David. As far as I know, he's faithful. He's your own son-in-law, Saul. He's the captain over your bodyguard, and he's honored in your house. Who else should I give aid to? But the person that's honored and the person that's actually in charge of your bodyguards. If anything else has happened, I didn't know. I'm just the priest over here in Nob. I'm not part of all this intrigue that you have going on. And you know what? Is this the first time I've done this for David? Nope. Did I get in trouble before? Nope. So I was just doing what I have always done, King Saul. But again, you notice what he says in there too. David regularly went to him and inquired of the Lord, right? Is this the first time? No. In fact, this is a normal thing. He normally comes. He normally inquires of the Lord. But what's also kind of implied in there? Who's not coming? Saul. Saul has not come to the Lord. Saul has not inquired of the Lord. That's implied here, but not overtly stated. I'm just doing what I've always done. Why are you angry that you, Saul, should have let me know if this was such a big deal? But you say that kind of thing to the man who holds the sword? Is that a smart thing then to kind of have said? No. Not smart. This is standing up for the Lord, but it is also a way for you not to be alive for much longer. Very similar in that regards to when Luther went before the Holy Roman Emperor and he said, "Here I stand, I can do no other." And he did so, putting his life on the line. This is where I stand. This is where I'm at. I will not recant. I will stay on the word of the Lord. Now, the Holy Roman Emperor had given Luther free passage, right? And said, "I will not kill you if you come." What had he not said? He did not say, "Okay, once we're done, you're free." Okay, fine, go out of the gates. And that's why when Luther left, having said that, Luther's wasn't a king, but Luther's patron had him quickly kidnapped right outside and taken away into hiding, because he knew that the Holy Roman Emperor would have him killed very quickly. As soon as his promise was over, Luther will die. That's why he was kidnapped and taken to the castle, sometimes called the Castle of the Birds, the Kingdom of the Birds. He was taken to that castle. Same thing here, putting it all on the line, but he's not going to escape, neither him nor his household. So that brings us to verse 15, 16. Well, 16 and 17. Is it my turn? Mm-hmm. And the king said, "You shall surely die, Elimelech, you and all your father's house." The king turned to the guard who stood around him. "Turn and kill these priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David." And they knew that he fled and did not disclose it to me. But the servants of the king would not put out their hand to strike the priests of the Lord. He's feeling very lonely, isn't he? So he says, "Okay, you're going to die? Off with their heads." Queen of Hearts, right? Off with their heads. Make this happen. The Queen of Hearts in the Alice in Wonderland was completely insane, right? Where's Saul at? Completely insane. Very much a lot of things that would have been said about, I forget the name of the queen, but the queen, the Queen of England of the day, who the Queen of Hearts and Alice in Wonderland was mocking to a certain degree. You could say about King Saul going on here too. Very insane. Off with their heads. And they don't. That's not what Saul wanted. Immediate thoughts, treason. Treason. That's the immediate thoughts that would go forward. Now, did they do it out of loyalty to David? Maybe some. Remember the word just before, he was the head of his bodyguard. So maybe there was some loyalty to David. Was there definitely loyalty to the priesthood? Yes. So there was definitely that loyalty that was happening right there. And with all of Saul's actions, guess what? This is going to push people to go over and support David. So this is pushing more and more support for David with all of what. So they say, "No, we will not." And that is a hard thing to say. And they do. So then what happens? Then we get to verse 18 and 19.
Is it Doeg, or how do you say that?
Doeg.
Doeg. Then the king said to Doeg, you turn and strike the priest. And Doeg the Edomite turned and struck down the priest and killed on that day 85 persons who wore the linen ephod. And now the city of the priests he put to the sword, both man and woman, child and infant, ox, donkey, and sheep. He put to the sword.
Killed them. So not only killed the priests, and wore the ephod, that was the sign of the priests. Killed all other priests, not all, we'll find that in the next verse, but killed all the priests that he could get his hands on. And then this is his thought, I'm going to cut the Lord from the land. The priests are the people for the Lord, right? So I'm going to kill all the priests, going to kill their whole households, going to kill the entire city, raze that to the ground, kill every last animal, man, woman, and child that can be found. They will be gone. Therefore, the priesthood will be gone, and therefore the Lord is gone. And I will have conquered the Lord. You have the kingdom of grace, you have the kingdom of power. I'm going to destroy the kingdom of grace. You could today say that I'm going to destroy the church. Kill every last one of them, gone, and then my kingdom will be secure. That's the thought process. Now that that's gone, then there'll be no support for King David. Then there'll be no support from the Lord for King David because they're not connected anymore. Therefore, I am in charge once again. That's the warped thinking going on in his mind. And so kill everything, raise it all to the ground. Now we got the last section, verse 20 through 23.
But one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of
Ahitub.
Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the priests of the Lord. And David said to Abiathar, I knew on that day when Doeg the Edomite was there that he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all the persons of your father's house. Stay with me, do not be afraid, for he who seeks my life seeks your life. With me, you shall be in safety.
And so here you have, he killed all the priests. And then the next verse, but there was one who escaped. And was there more than one? Yes. Going up as we go a little bit further on into 2 Samuel, we're going to find a man named Zadok, who will also be one of the priests. So there were other priests who did survive this cleansing that happened. And so, but Abiathar, Zadok, were there others? Probably some others that escaped through the net that King Saul, but most would have died. And so he killed, thinking, I have cut it off. But the Lord makes some to escape. Abiathar would be one. Finds David, and David says, stay here. But you can tell that David is keeping guilt, isn't he? David has felt guilt over this. I knew when I saw him there that this was going to happen. And he takes it upon himself. On the other hand, should Abiathar have been wise enough to know what was going on and fled himself? He should have seen it coming too. But he and his household stayed, maybe thinking by saying, Saul, this is my excuse, therefore or maybe just do it on me. He may not have thought you're going to kill everybody in my household that you can find. And yet he does. And so, but what does Saul do? Kills and tries to separate from the Lord. What does David do? Protects and keeps as much as he can together with the Lord. And you can see the grave difference between these two happening. Any last thoughts as we wrap up today? Well, according to this, we've been going on for an hour now. On the nose. Let's end with a prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank and praise your name for all the blessings and gifts you give to us. We pray, Lord, that you will guide us, that you will lead us. Help us, Lord, to use your wisdom to follow you and not our own thoughts and ideas. In your holy and most blessed name we pray.